A cold wind swept through the mountain pass, carrying with it the damp, heavy scent of earth and stone. I pulled up the collar of my leather jacket, glancing at Kate, my wife, my partner through all these journeys that were never meant for the faint of heart. Her sharp eyes remained focused, but I knew, deep down, something was unsettling both of us. The motorcycle let out a short growl as I twisted the throttle, pushing us further into the wilderness, where only whispered legends and eerie folktales had survived the passing generations. This time, our journey wasn't just about haunted towns or cursed roads. No, this time, we were heading into a place even seasoned explorers feared to tread, treacherous mountains cloaked in mist, where spirits roamed, ancient curses lingered, and mysteries remained unsolved. Kate took a sip from her thermos, her gaze fixed on the dark silhouettes of trees ahead. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice low, yet laced with caution. I didn't answer right away. Another gust of wind rushed past, carrying with it an eerie sound, like whispers echoing through the wilderness. We had faced many things throughout our travels, but this feeling, it was different. It was as if we had unknowingly crossed an invisible boundary, stepping into a realm where humans were never meant to go. Tonight, where would our journey lead us? And who, or what, was waiting in the darkness? The haunted lake of Nevada. After leaving the haunted church in the forest, Tom and Kate continued their journey through the Appalachian Mountains. The terrifying experiences in the dark woods still lingered in their minds. Deciding to move west, they drove across the endless roads of America, hoping to find a peaceful place to rest. However, fate had other plans for them. At a roadside diner in Nevada, they overheard a chilling story about a mysterious lake where numerous disappearances had occurred. The legend piqued their curiosity, and despite warnings, Tom and Kate set out to uncover the truth. Tom and Kate drove along the vast, barren roads of Nevada, where the scorching sun blazed over the desert, creating a dry and eerie atmosphere. Little did they know that this journey would lead them into an unspeakable horror. They stopped at a small, rundown roadside cafe. Inside, there was an unsettling silence. An old man behind the counter eyed them warily. When they asked about the nearby lake, his expression darkened, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "You shouldn't go there," he muttered. "The cursed lake, it's not meant for the living." Tom and Kate exchanged glances. Supernatural stories always intrigued them, and this warning only fueled their curiosity. The old man continued, his voice carrying the weight of sorrowful history. "Many people have disappeared there. They walk in and are never seen again. Some come back, but they are no longer themselves." Kate frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked her in the eye and spoke slowly, each word heavy with ominous meaning. "They don't recognize anyone. They don't remember who they are. It's like their souls have been taken." Despite the eerie warning, Tom and Kate decided to proceed. They drove for another 3 hours until they reached the area near the lake. From a distance, the shimmering water reflected the golden hues of the setting sun, appearing tranquil yet strangely unearthly. They set up camp near the shore, observing their surroundings. There were no signs of human presence, yet an unshakable feeling of unease crept over them. The wind rustled through the dried trees, carrying a faint, whispering sound. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature plummeted. Tom took out his camera to capture a few shots, but when he checked the photos, they saw a faint silhouette standing behind them. Kate spun around, but there was nothing there. Suddenly, a soft but distinct sound echoed from the lake. Gentle ripples formed on the water's surface, as if someone, or something, was rising from the depths. Kate shuddered. "Did you hear that?" Tom nodded, his expression tense. They stood still in the darkness, staring at the lake. A thin mist began to spread across the water's surface, and within it, they could make out a figure, a woman, standing in the middle of the lake. staring back at them. Before they could react, the figure vanished, yet the eerie sounds continued to linger in the air. A chill crawled up Kate's spine, making her feel as if something unseen was watching them. Determined to uncover the truth, they decided to stay longer. Tom examined the ground near their campsite and noticed old, abandoned belongings scattered around, perhaps left behind by those who had come here but never returned. Among the objects, he picked up a rusted wristwatch with a cracked face, engraved with the words, "Remember us." Kate wandered toward an old tree near the lake and discovered eerie carvings on its bark. The markings were haphazard, as if scratched out in a state of panic. "Do not look into the water." "Tom, look at this." Kate pointed to the engravings. Tom walked over, his expression grave. Someone left this as a warning. They must have seen something terrifying. As night fell, an unnatural silence engulfed the surroundings. There were no insects, no wind, only absolute stillness. Then, suddenly, a whisper carried through the air. "Help me?" Kate gasped and turned abruptly. But no one was there. Tom flicked on his flashlight, scanning the area. A sudden gust of icy wind rushed past them, sending a shiver down their spines. Just then, Kate felt something grasp her wrist. She recoiled in horror, only to find nothing but empty space. "Tom, something just grabbed me." "That's impossible." Tom tightened his grip on the flashlight, trying to stay composed. But then, they both heard a new sound, the unmistakable crunching of footsteps on dry leaves. Yet, they saw no one. The nightmare had only begun, and their first night at the cursed lake would be one they would never forget. Part 2. The terrifying truth beneath the lake. The night at the cursed lake became eerily silent. No wind, no sounds of insects, only the overwhelming darkness and a suffocating tension pressing down on the atmosphere. Tom and Kate sat inside their tent, neither speaking a word, but both fully aware that something was watching them. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the lake. This time, it was not the fragmented whispers but the distinct splashing of footsteps wading through the water. Getting closer and closer, Kate shivered, gripping Tom's hand tightly. He slowly unzipped the tent and shone his flashlight toward the lake. The water's surface was as still as glass, yet a faint figure appeared. A woman in a white dress, her long hair hanging limply, obscuring her face. She stood motionless, yet it felt as if she was staring straight at them. Kate took a step back. "Who is she?" Tom swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the figure. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before they could move, the apparition suddenly shifted. She took slow steps toward the shore, water splashing around her. The most terrifying part was, though the water reached her feet, her dress remained completely dry. Kate gasped, her trembling fingers clutching Tom's arm. "Tom, let's go." They hurriedly packed their belongings. But then a piercing scream erupted from the lake, a sound filled with agony and despair. Tom turned back just in time to see the apparition vanish, leaving only ripples spreading across the lake's surface. They bolted toward their car, but strangely, the path leading out of the campsite had disappeared. In its place stood a dense, dark forest. "We're going the wrong way," Tom snapped. Kate tried to stay calm. "That's impossible. The road was just here." A voice suddenly spoke behind them, weak yet eerily clear. "You cannot leave?" Kate shrieked, spinning around. In front of them stood a man with ghostly pale skin, his eyes hollow, his flesh wrinkled and swollen as if waterlogged. He stood completely still, yet his lips curled into an eerie smile. "We are trapped forever?" Tom grabbed Kate's hand and ran. They plunged into the forest. But the deeper they went, the more the scenery seemed to repeat. The same trees, the same rocks, looping endlessly as if they were running in circles through an infinite space. Kate began to panic. "Tom, we're really trapped. What do we do?" Tom took a deep breath, thinking fast. We need to find something unusual. If this place is cursed, there has to be an exit. Suddenly, a faint light appeared in the distance. A pale blue glow flickered through the trees. With no other choice, they moved toward it. As they got closer, they saw the light was coming from an old, broken mirror standing in the middle of a clearing. The mirror reflected the lake, but not as they saw it. In the reflection, the lake was a deep black abyss, and beneath it, countless hands reached up, desperately grasping for something beyond the shore. Kate stepped back, horrified. What is this? Tom gritted his teeth. Maybe this is what's trapping the souls. If we destroy it, we might escape. Before they could act, the air around them turned ice cold. The whispering voices grew louder, now forming coherent words. Join us, stay forever. The wind howled, and the trees twisted unnaturally as if alive. A shadowy figure emerged from the mirror, gliding toward them. It had no face, only a hollow void where its eyes should be. Tom grabbed a large rock and hurled it at the mirror. The instant the glass shattered, an ear-piercing scream echoed through the forest. The ground shook violently. The trees flickered between existence and non-existence. A blinding white light engulfed them, and for a brief moment, Kate felt weightless, as if she were being pulled through dimensions. When the light faded, they found themselves back on the dirt road leading to their car. Panting heavily, they wasted no time scrambling inside. Tom started the engine, slamming his foot on the gas. The car sped down the road, leaving the haunted lake behind. As they drove, a strange stillness hung in the air. Kate glanced at her reflection in the window and gasped. Her reflection was not moving in sync with her. It stared back at her with an unnatural grin. Tom, something's wrong. Her voice trembled. Tom glanced at her, confused. What do you mean? Before she could answer, the radio turned on by itself, crackling with static. Then, through the distortion, a familiar voice spoke. You can never truly leave. Tom slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a halt on the empty highway. The headlights flickered, and in the rearview mirror, a pale figure sat in the backseat, its hollow eyes staring at them. Even though they had left, the curse of the lake had followed them. But it wasn't over. The moment Tom tried to restart the car, the engine refused to turn. The streetlights flickered above them, casting distorted shadows across the deserted road. Kate's breathing grew shallow as she caught a glimpse of something moving in the distance, a figure standing in the middle of the road ahead. Motionless, waiting. The static on the radio turned into a series of chilling whispers. You took something from us. Now, we take something from you. Kate turned to Tom, panic rising. Tom, we can't stay here. We have to. A loud bang erupted from the trunk of the car, shaking the entire vehicle. Something was inside. Something was trying to get out. Tom reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The windows began to fog up, and the words, "Let us in," slowly appeared on the glass, as if written by unseen hands. Kate screamed as the car suddenly lurched forward on its own, speeding down the road with neither of them touching the pedals. The headlights dimmed, and ahead, the figure in the road remained still. Just as they were about to collide, everything went black. When they awoke, they were parked outside the same diner they had visited before heading to the lake. The clock on the dashboard read exactly the same time as when they had left. The radio played a soft, distorted tune, and in the reflection of the rearview mirror, their pale, haunted faces stared back at them, but something was different. Their reflections were smiling. The abandoned morgue in St. Louis. Tom and Kate left the cursed lake in Nevada, leaving behind the murky waters and the eerie whispers that still echoed in their minds. As they rode in silence, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them, something invisible yet ominous. Tom gripped the handlebars of his motorcycle tightly, trying to push the creeping unease out of his thoughts. They stopped at a roadside diner, where the flickering neon sign cast an eerie glow onto the rain-slick pavement. As they sipped their steaming cups of coffee, they overheard a conversation from the booth behind them. A group of young men were discussing an abandoned morgue in St. Louis, a place rumored to be haunted, where visitors claimed to hear whispers in the dark, invisible hands touching them, and ghostly figures moving among the cold storage drawers. One of the men, who had been mostly silent, suddenly spoke in a low, nervous voice. "I went in there once, just once. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a freezing hand rest on my shoulder. I turned around, and no one was there. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw a face behind me that wasn't mine." Kate shuddered. Tom met her gaze, and in that moment, they both knew they couldn't ignore this place. Once again, their journey was leading them into another nightmare. The motorcycle roared to life, cutting through the night as they headed straight toward their next chilling destination. Tom and Kate arrived in St. Louis under a veil of misty rain. The sky loomed heavy with dark clouds, and the streetlights cast elongated shadows on the wet pavement. Kate checked her phone. The map guided them to a small, deserted road a few miles from the city center. At the end of that road stood the abandoned morgue, waiting in silence. The morgue was once part of St. Benedict Hospital, a well-known medical facility in the 1950s. However, a scandal led to its abrupt closure. According to sparse records, some doctors performed bizarre rituals on corpses, hoping to unlock the secrets of prolonged life. After the hospital shut down, the morgue was abandoned, left to decay and be forgotten. But not everyone forgot. Those who dared to venture inside spoke of soft cries echoing through the empty halls, storage drawers opening on their own, and icy fingers brushing against their skin. Some never returned. The ones who did had stories that sent shivers down the spine. Even Tom and Kate, who had encountered many supernatural horrors, couldn't ignore the sense of foreboding as they approached the morgue. Before stepping inside, they decided to gather information. They tracked down Mark, a local young man who had once sneaked inside. His face turned pale as he recounted his experience. "I don't remember how long I was in there," Mark muttered, his voice trembling, "but there was something whispering in the dark. I turned around, but no one was there. Then, I felt a hand, ice cold, touch the back of my neck. I ran as fast as I could, but I swear, I could hear footsteps following me, even though no one was behind me." Tom and Kate exchanged glances. They had heard similar stories before, but that didn't make it any less unsettling. They reached the morgue's entrance, where a rusted metal door groaned as Tom pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, a long, dark corridor stretched ahead, its overhead fluorescent lights long dead. The air was thick with mildew and an unnatural chill. In the main room, an old autopsy table stood covered in dust, rust stains spreading across its once sterile surface. Storage drawers, some mysteriously ajar, lined the walls. The eerie silence was so profound that they could hear their own heartbeats. Then, a knock echoed from an empty room. Kate turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Tom nodded. They slowly approached the source of the sound, but just as they reached it, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. A cold shiver ran down Kate's spine. She turned to Tom, but as her flashlight beam swept across the wall, a shadowy figure flickered into view. As they ventured deeper into the morgue, their camera recorded every unsettling moment. The air grew thick and heavy, as if unseen eyes were watching them from every corner. Then, suddenly, a sound, the metallic scrape of a body drawer sliding open. "Someone's here," Tom muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. They rushed toward a small records room, where they found decaying files stacked haphazardly. Kate picked one up and read aloud. Dr. Raymond Holloway conducted experimental life extension procedures in 1948. She hesitated, eyes widening. His name appears in the sealed hospital records. At that moment, their flashlights flickered uncontrollably. In the brief, erratic bursts of light, a spectral figure emerged at the end of the corridor. He wore a stained white lab coat, his hair silver and unkempt. His eyes were milky white, devoid of pupils. He simply stood there, watching them. Then, a whispering voice slithered through the air, a raspy hiss that sent chills down their spines. "You should not be here." The lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed them whole. Darkness consumed Tom and Kate, the heavy silence thickening around them like an oppressive weight. Kate gripped Tom's hand tightly, her pulse hammering in her ears as whispers continued to swirl in the suffocating stillness of the morgue. When their flashlights flickered back on, Tom noticed an old iron door at the end of the hallway. It was locked, but the scratches and dents around the handle suggested that someone, or something, had tried desperately to escape from the inside. "We need to see what's in there," Tom murmured, pulling a small crowbar from his jacket. With a forceful shove, the lock snapped open with a sharp metallic crack. Kate shone her flashlight through the opening. A narrow staircase led downward into a pitch-black abyss, the steps coated in dust and debris. A putrid stench of decay and mildew drifted up from below. As they descended, the air turned frigid, their breath visible in the dim light. A low, hollow gust of wind rustled past them, an impossibility, given there were no ventilation shafts. The flashlight beams illuminated a room filled with glass jars, some intact, others shattered across the floor. Inside the unbroken jars were preserved human organs, skeletal remains, and strips of decomposing flesh. Some of the contents had turned black, oozing through cracks in the glass. Kate gagged, stepping backward, only to freeze when her light landed on an old photograph pinned to the wall. It depicted a group of doctors in lab coats, their eyes eerily vacant. "Tom, this is him." Kate pointed to the figure standing in the center. It was Dr. Raymond Holloway, the same name from the sealed hospital records. Just as she spoke, the entire room began to tremble. The glass jars shattered, shards flying through the air like deadly projectiles. A cold wind howled, and from the deepest corner of the basement, a dark silhouette materialized. The sound of shuffling footsteps echoed across the room. Slow and deliberate, the figure stepped into the dim light, revealing a twisted face with sunken, white milky eyes and a grotesque grin. "You do not belong here," a rasping, guttural voice slithered through the cold air. Tom felt a sudden force slam into his chest, sending him flying against the wall. Kate rushed forward to help, but the doctor's ghost blocked her path, extending a bony, decayed hand toward her. Their flashlights flickered violently. Kate could feel icy fingers closing around her wrist, squeezing tightly. A sharp, searing pain shot up her arm, as if something was draining her strength. "Tom!" she screamed, struggling against the invisible grip. Tom, regaining his footing, grabbed his crowbar and swung it blindly through the air. A piercing scream erupted, and the ghost momentarily flickered, distorted and weakened. Seizing the opportunity, Tom yanked Kate away and sprinted toward the stairs. But when they reached the top, they realized the basement door had slammed shut behind them. Kate yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Tom reached into his jacket, retrieving a small pocket knife, sliding it into the door's crevice. He managed to pry open a small gap, just enough to wedge his fingers in and force the door open with one final push. They stumbled outside, gasping for air, hearts pounding. The air still felt unnaturally cold, and a strange silence had settled over the morgue. Kate clutched her wrist, a deep, Black bruise had formed where the ghost had grabbed her. Tom wiped his forehead, only to find his jacket damp with something cold and slimy, as if a ghostly hand had left its imprint. They turned one last time to look at the building. Through the dusty, cracked window on the second floor, a pale face stared down at them. Then, it vanished. The abandoned morgue remained silent, waiting for its next victims to step inside. The Ghost Ship. Haunting of the Queen Mary. Tom and Kate left the abandoned morgue in St. Louis, carrying with them invisible bruises but undeniable truths about the horrors they had just witnessed. As they rode away from the city, neither of them spoke for a long time. The air was heavy with silence, as if the darkness of the morgue still clung to them. Stopping at a roadside gas station, Kate remained seated on the motorcycle, her gaze distant. "We should take a break," she murmured. Tom nodded, but, instead of looking for a roadside motel, he pulled out his phone and opened the map. "Do you remember the Queen Mary?" Kate turned to him. "The haunted ship in Long Beach?" Tom nodded. "I've read some reports recently. People say that strange occurrences have increased more than ever. If there's a place full of trapped souls, it's that ship." Kate took a deep breath as if weighing the choice between resting or plunging into another nightmare. But they both knew this wasn't just a random trip. Something was guiding them from one haunted place to the next. "Then let's go," she said. The motorcycle roared to life again, heading straight toward the California coast, where the Queen Mary awaited them, waiting to tell the story of souls who never left. The Queen Mary stood still in the harbor of Long Beach, its once majestic exterior now looming under the moonlight, carrying an air of eerie grandeur. Despite its transformation into a floating hotel and tourist attraction, stories of its haunted past never faded. Visitors whispered about encounters with unseen presences, chilling voices in empty corridors, and shadows slipping through locked doors. The Queen Mary was more than a luxury liner. It was a vessel of tragedy. During World War II, it was repurposed as a troop transport ship, earning the nickname, the Gray Ghost. Many soldiers never made it to their destinations, their spirits allegedly lingering on board. Others spoke of accidents, deaths in the boiler rooms, and passengers who mysteriously vanished overboard. Tom and Kate, drawn by the ship's sinister reputation, decided to board the Queen Mary for an overnight investigation. The reports were too compelling to ignore, objects moving on their own, disembodied voices calling out names, and cold spots that seemed to follow people through the hallways. The couple signed up for a midnight paranormal tour, blending in with the curious thrill seekers. The guide, a young man with a flashlight and an exaggerated sense of theatrics, led them through the ship, recounting stories of ghostly figures in first-class cabins, spectral children playing in the empty swimming pool, and mysterious knocks on cabin doors in the dead of night. But Tom and Kate had their own agenda. Midway through the tour, they exchanged glances and silently drifted away from the group, venturing down the dimly lit corridors of the lower decks. The further they went, the colder the air became. As they made their way through the grand corridors, Kate suddenly grabbed Tom's arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Tom listened. Soft footsteps, small, like those of a child, echoed down the hall. They turned a corner and caught a glimpse of something, a small shadow darting across the hallway, disappearing through a closed door. Kate's grip on her flashlight tightened. The little girl, people say she drowned in the ship's swimming pool. Tom took a cautious step forward, placing his hand on the door's handle. The second he touched it, the door burst open on its own. A wave of frigid air rushed out. Inside, the room was empty, save for an old, unused life preserver hanging on the wall. Moving further into the ship, They entered a long corridor lined with rows of closed cabin doors. The eerie silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the old structure. Kate reached for one of the doors, but before she could touch it, slam! The door to their left shut violently, rattling the entire corridor. Tom and Kate spun around, their flashlights sweeping across the walls. No one was there. The air felt thick, pressing against their chests. The sensation of being watched was unmistakable. Following the pull of the paranormal, Tom and Kate made their way to the infamous boiler room number 13. The site of one of the ship's most tragic accidents. It was where a young engineer was crushed to death by the thick steel doors. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped even further. The massive boilers loomed over them, their rusted surfaces absorbing the dim glow of their flashlights. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing scream erupted from somewhere deep within the room. Kate gasped, turning toward Tom, but before either could react, the metal door behind them slammed shut with a deafening bang. A shadow stretched across the room, standing just at the edge of the dim light. Kate swallowed hard. Tom, we're not alone. The shadow shifted, and then it moved. The metal door slammed shut behind Tom and Kate, trapping them inside boiler room number 13. The temperature plummeted, and the air felt heavy, thick with an unseen force. Tom gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on his flashlight. Kate's breath came in quick, shallow bursts. The darkness around them felt alive, pulsating with a sinister energy. A sudden metallic clang echoed from the far end of the room. Tom whipped his flashlight toward the sound, its beam slicing through the dense gloom. A shadowy figure stood near one of the rusted boilers, tall, imposing, and unmoving. His face was obscured, but the outline of his tattered uniform was unmistakable. The spirit of the engineer who had met his gruesome fate. Kate whispered, "Do you see him?" Tom barely nodded before the figure took a slow step forward. The air grew colder. A faint, rhythmic tapping echoed around them, as if unseen hands were knocking against the metal pipes in a chilling pattern. Then, the figure rushed at them. Kate let out a sharp scream as Tom grabbed her wrist and yanked her away. The flashlight flickered as if being drained by the energy surrounding them. They stumbled toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. Behind them, the ghostly presence grew stronger. The air crackled, and a deep, guttural whisper filled the room. "You shouldn't be here." Tom slammed his shoulder against the heavy steel door. Come on, come on." Kate fumbled with the handle, but it was ice cold to the touch. A deep, unsettling growl reverberated through the room, and suddenly, bang, the door burst open on its own, flinging them into the hallway. They scrambled to their feet and slammed it shut behind them, panting heavily. For a brief moment, silence filled the corridor. Then, from inside the boiler room, came the sound of metal scraping against metal, as if something was trying to claw its way out. "We need to get out of here," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper, as they rushed through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing ominously. Another sound joined them, whispers, dozens of them, speaking in different languages, overlapping, urgent, desperate. Tom and Kate froze. The whispers seemed to come from the very walls around them. The Queen Mary was speaking, or rather, the souls trapped within were. Suddenly, one voice rose above the rest. A woman's voice, hollow and distant. "Help me." Kate's breath hitched. "Did you hear that?" Tom nodded, scanning the hallway. "Where is it coming from?" They turned a corner, and stopped dead in their tracks. Standing before them, emerging from the shadows, was a figure dressed in an old Navy uniform. His head was missing, but his body moved toward them as if searching for something. A low moan echoed from the empty space where his head should have been. Tom and Kate backed away, but the specter lifted a trembling hand, reaching toward them. The air smelled of seawater and something rotting. Then, without warning, the figure vanished. Only the lingering scent of salt and decay remained. Panting, they reached the main deck. The ocean breeze was a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. They thought they were safe, until Tom felt something cold and wet trickle down his shoulder. He touched his jacket. It was soaked. Kate turned to him, her eyes widening. "Tom, you're back." He glanced at the reflection in a nearby window. A wet, skeletal handprint stained his jacket. Kate's face paled. "We have to leave." As they hurried down the gangway, Kate dared one final glance at the Queen Mary. For a fleeting second, dozens of shadowy figures stood on the upper deck, watching them, and then they disappeared into the mist. The ship, silent once more, seemed to hum with unseen life. Tom and Kate had escaped, but one truth remained: the Queen Mary's dead never truly left. The motorcycle pulled away from the Long Beach harbor as the night fully embraced the city. I glanced at the rearview mirror, catching one last glimpse of the Queen Mary, towering in the distance. Its dim lights flickered over the dark water, a ghostly reflection of a ship that had never truly left the past behind. Even as we rode away, I couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes still watching us from the decks of that haunted vessel. Kate tightened her grip around my waist as we merged onto the highway. The ocean breeze carried a chill, not unlike the bone-deep cold we had felt at the abandoned morgue in St. Louis, where silence itself was more terrifying than screams. And before that, we had stood on the shore of the cursed lake in Nevada, staring into the abyss of waters that seemed to hold something far more sinister than just its dark depths. 3 places, 3 stories, and 3 reminders that this world holds far more than what meets the eye. Kate's voice was thoughtful as she asked, "Do you think all of this is connected somehow? The spirits at the lake, in the morgue, and on that ship, do you think they're searching for something?" I took a deep breath, recalling the whispers that echoed from the cold chambers of the morgue, the shadowy figures that loomed on the Queen Mary's decks, and the eerie sensation of something lurking beneath the lake's surface, waiting to pull us under. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I have a feeling we haven't seen the worst of it yet." Kate didn't respond right away. She simply rested her head against my back as the motorcycle roared forward into the darkness. We both knew the truth: mysteries never truly end. And whether we wanted to or not, the road ahead would lead us to even darker, more haunted places. Episode the 9th of may be over, but our journey is far from finished.